Providing, these will be in my slides, providing that you use deterministic functions to retrieve the data. And here's an example using Jeremy Cole's show profile patch from the 5.0 community build, which is not an enterprise, so those people who think there are enterprise only features, this is a community only feature. When you look at it, you'll see that just a simple select statement, I think I've got the select statement there, maybe I don't. Just a simple select statement actually took 17 steps within the MySQL server, and for the query cache it took 5. So the query cache is very efficient in certain steps. However, I think I made a note here, or maybe I didn't. The query cache in a poorly tuned environment can slow your system down. So be aware of this. You should always test with the query cache turned off to see, and verify whether it's actually better or not. From a design perspective, you should always create objects appropriately. People who create many tables in one schema that store the same amount of data, you're just creating an extra file handle if you're retrieving it and it can actually be stored in a simple in one database table. Examples where they have individual tables for codes and values, where you have 60 of those tables stored in a schema when you could just have one. Splitting out tables for optimum performance, we talked about blob and text. It may be more efficient to do 2 select statements when you need individual row of data as opposed to selecting it in a set when you don't really need it. Considering the use of permanent tables rather than doing create temp table and drop temp tables, another way in terms of defining when you create objects and what resources it uses internally in MySQL. This is running out of time, the last 2. You should always define naming standards. I come from doing data architecture now for almost 20 years, and historically when you grow up, you have naming standards. Always define your primary key as a full column name, not just ID, and I've gone back and forwards over many years, and the number one reason is to uniquely identify it is you can use tools to verify across your schema that your keys are all the same data type. One of the things is that if you have a column in one table which is primary key is integer, and another table is a foreign key is VARCHAR 15, that's not good, even though it's got the same value in it. So you can use other things. Be descriptive about the column names. Too often I see a column name in a table and I go, what does that really mean? And they don't know because they didn't design it. So there's no harm in defining things properly, and especially avoiding reserved words. And so number 20, which is one of my favourites, is you should always test your software. And I'll give you a horror story to explain why this is important, because you shouldn't test on a production system. The goal of testing is not to test your software, the goal is to break the software. You need to know when your system is going to fail so that you can be prepared for that. And most people don't do this. I've been on a client, the actual client I showed before, which had 12 production servers where I cut their disk footprint by 78%. And I said, okay, well let's apply these changes to the schema and test them and see what the impact is. And I said, oh well, let's pull up the test system and do it. And I said, well, we don't use a test system. And I said, what do you mean you don't use a test system? They didn't physically have a test system. I actually had to pull the schema down and check the code that was written by the DBA, which actually had syntax errors in it, just to see that it was actually valid and not valid. And this client actually took one of their production servers out of their load balancer to apply the change to test it. And that's just criminal, because it's not applying, you're not focusing on what is important, which is understanding your code, testing your code, making sure it's going to work, deploying it, being prepared. Another thing I'm very interested in is architect for disaster. You have to be prepared for a disaster, or in this case of testing, you've got to be prepared when your system's going to stop working. When you get Slashdot or Dig or Facebook and all of a sudden your load is 10x or 20x, you're going to be in trouble. So very quickly, there's an executive summary. If you didn't listen to the first 45 minutes, then it's not going to help. Help is available. I do have some experience, so come and see me if you want to know more. And we'll finish up there. Any questions? Come and see me, I think, because we're both in the next level.